All right, welcome to Book by Book. We're in 2 Samuel. We're going to be starting chapter 1 and going through chapter 4 of 2 Samuel. So previously on the Bible, we had, getting all confused here. We got to where Saul died. And so we're going to pick up there again, but this time we are picking up with David hearing about Saul's death. And so if you remember last time was several weeks ago, but Saul and his army were fighting the Philistines. They were losing and they were overrun, and Saul was asking his armor bearer to take his life so that the Philistines wouldn't torture him. And the armor bearer wouldn't do it, but the armor bearer also took his own life. And so Jonathan, Saul, they're all dead, and the Philistines, they took the bodies and put them up on the wall, and the men of oh man, the town is spacing. What's that? Gibeah is where Saul was headquartered. Jabesh Gilead. You were close. Jabesh Gilead, yes. The men of Jabesh Gilead went and got Saul's body back. And so that's kind of where we ended on 1 Samuel. And so 2 Samuel picks up in the same place. Now, part of the structure of 1 Samuel in the end part here is making sure that David is far away from having any possible connection to the death of Saul. And so like the writer is being very intentional to say he was all the way down in Ziklag. He had his own crisis that he was dealing with because the people, when they went to go muster with the army of Philistines, there were raiders who came in and took all the stuff from Ziklag. And so David had to go and pursue them. So David was handling a totally different crisis as the Philistine army was fighting the army of Israel. And so now David liberated his people, and he's come back to Ziklag, and that's where we pick up in 2 Samuel, starting in verse 1. And so let's just jump in. After the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked him. He answered, "I have escaped from the Israelite camp." "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me." "The men fled from the battle," he replied. "Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," the young man said, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear and with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me, and I said, 'What can I do?' He answered, 'Who are you?' 'An Amalekite,' I answered. Then he said to me, 'Stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive.' So I stood beside him and killed him because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm and have brought them here to my lord." Then David and the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who brought him the report, "Where are you from?" "I am the son of a foreigner, an Amalekite," he answered. David asked him, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David called one of his men and said, "Go strike him down." So he struck him down, and he died. For David had said to him, "Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, 'I killed the Lord's anointed.'" So, so in this setting, in this setup here, we have this guy who just kind of probably was a prisoner of the Philistines who escaped at some point during this battle. And so as he's running away from the Philistines, this Amalekite prisoner running away stumbles upon the king who's suffering. And this is one of the
He lied too.
major ironies
He didn't do it.
of the um Saul's life, because his rejection as king was because he didn't follow the Lord's commands in dealing with the Amalekites. He whoa he didn't completely eliminate the Amalekites. Instead, he kept the king and the best of their livestock and all these different things, and this was disobeying God's command. And so at the end of his life here, it's an Amalekite who actually comes and ends Saul's life. Saul tried to take his own life, but it was an Amalekite who actually struck him down. And so this is a bit of an ironic moment here where if Saul had just done what he was supposed to do, his life would have been much different. And so there's just one more reminder here. And the guy who's coming to David, I mean, the conflict between David and Saul would have been known throughout the kingdom, and being knowing that if David finds out that Saul is dead, then the Amalekite is assuming like, I'll go to him and this will probably bode well for me. This is a good opportunity. So I will bring the good news to the king, the new king of the people, that the old king is dead. And so he comes and says like, look, he confesses everything. Like, I saw him. He asked me to kill him. I killed him. What he did was an act of mercy, but he's also trying to leverage that for his own benefit by coming to David. And so when we read through all of this, like it's heartbreaking to like have the king basically just crying out to want to die. But then the guy, he seems merciful, and he comes mourning. He comes like, in all the right posture. But you read, then David's like, well, now I'm going to have you executed because you actually killed the king. Like, your blood is on your own head. And all throughout David's flight from Saul, he had those two opportunities to kill him. He never attacked the people of Israel. He never wanted to be responsible for Saul's death. He knew that he would be king, but he was not going to force the kingdom to come to him. And so here, like this moment, like he said long ago, I'm not going to strike the Lord's anointed, but here's this Amalekite totally willing to strike the Lord's anointed. So this is part of the reason why David has him executed, was like, you can't just kill the king and think everything's going to be fine. Right. I don't know. We put ourselves in these situations and think about the Bible and like put yourself in the shoes. Like, if you were David, like, how would you respond? Right. Like, I don't know if I would have executed somebody who killed my enemy. Right. The person who wanted me dead. Like, I don't know if I would have been like, well, that was the Lord's anointed, so you're going to have to be executed. Like, I don't know if I could do that. But there's also this, there's just the simple fact that an Amalekite was the one bringing the news. And throughout the Old Testament, up to this point, the Amalekites are the enemies of the people of Israel. David, when he went back to Ziklag, he was fighting against the Amalekites. And so here now, again, he's an Amalekite who he is instructed, like it's a holy war to fight against the Amalekites. So there's that element of this story as well. That is like, no, this man is not just a messenger. He's an enemy that is coming, and he just killed a king. And so there's a part of this that is like David continuing to do the job that the king of Israel was supposed to do, which was eliminate the Amalekites, which again, in our 21st century sensibilities, it's one of those things where like, this is just way too intense. This is way too violent. This is not how we do things these days. But this is a much bigger thing than just how we feel in the 21st century. This is a holy war. And so it is, again, not a prescriptive text for us. It is descriptive. Like, we're not called to go and do this to any of our enemies. So don't read this like, I'm going to go make sure I'm going to be like David here. No, don't do that. So, but David then responds, they all were fasting until sundown, but then David responds by writing a song. And this is one of the times where we see David using his songwriting in the actual narrative of Scripture. We don't see that a lot in his life story in First and Second Samuel, but the Psalms we see a lot of his songs. But this is one of those songs that he is actually thrown into the narrative, and it is a lament about Saul and Jonathan. So let's verse 17. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Yashar, and that book is referenced in other places. In the book of Joshua 10:13, they refer to it, and there's another reference that I wrote down, but I can't see it right now. But it is not a book that we have, but it is a reference to a collection of songs and stories of the upright, because Yashar means upright, and so it is just like it would be like the patriotic songs of Israel in particular. And so he writes this: a gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. And so the first part here, these first two lines, a gazelle lies slain on your heights. Now the word there for gazelle is interesting because it is a translation choice, because it could be a gazelle, but it also is translated as the glory. The two words, because Hebrew has consonants and then vowels, or dots and dashes under and on top of the letters. And so gazelle and glory have the same consonants. And so it can be translated, the glory of Israel lies slain on your heights, Israel, or a gazelle. So like a gazelle is like a fast, swift creature, so there's translation options here. But as we read this, we see like it really is looking at how like the king is an important figure for the people of Israel, and the king is dead. And so we start there. The king is dead. And then in verse 20, don't tell it to the Philistines. Don't let the Philistines gloat over our grief. And so that's what they're getting at in verse 20. For 21, the mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain. May no showers fall on your terraced fields, for there the shields of the mighty was despised. The shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. And so this is a curse on Gilboa to say, like, don't let rain or dew not fall on this place, that it be arid and not a place of growing. And the shields in Israel were wood shields with leather wrapped around on the outside, and they would rub the leather with oil. And so this anointing with oil is like part of the practice to preserve the leather. And so like that's what he's saying, like instead of being rubbed with oil, it's been despised, it's been defiled, it's unclean. And so he keeps going, from the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, the sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. And here is he's talking about, he's talking about Saul as the king, but Jonathan as his friend and his brother, like in battle. And they are, he's, even though Saul wanted him killed, he's still saying like Saul did good things for Israel. He brought a level of prestige to our kingdom. He secured our borders. He did these things that people should appreciate and should honor, even though Saul was far from perfect. And so this call to weep and to mourn is appropriate. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You are very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. And so for the end of this, it really does zero in onto David's relationship with Jonathan. And, earlier we saw Jonathan and David make a covenant with each other, and their friendship was a profound friendship. And there are people who read into this and like, he loved him more than his love for Jonathan was better than the love for women. And they try to make some kind of homosexual connection here. But that is a modern reading into the text. It's a kind of eisegesis where people try to put something here that is not here. There is no indication that Jonathan and David were anything more than brothers. And so having that kind of a friendship is something that I think it would probably be safe to say most men don't have that kind of relationship with anybody, where it's like, this person knows me so well. And so David's grief is significant. And I mean, this is going to be something that he will try to make right with Jonathan's descendants later. He's going to look for ways to honor Jonathan and in the years to come. So let's jump to chapter 2. In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" he asked. The Lord said, "Go up." David asked, "Where shall I go?" "To Hebron," the Lord answered. So David went up there with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David also took the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in Hebron and its towns. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah. When David was told that it was the men of from Jabesh Gilead who had buried Saul, he sent messengers to them to say to them, "The Lord bless you for showing this kindness to Saul, your master, by burying him. May the Lord now show you kindness and faithfulness, and I too will show you the same favor because you have done this. Now then, be strong and brave, for Saul, your master, is dead, and the people of Judah have anointed me king over them." So with Saul dead, Saul is the first king over all of the tribes of Israel, and now that's gone. And so that's going to create a leadership vacuum that the first few chapters of 2 Samuel will be addressing. But David goes and inquires of the Lord on what he should do next. Instead of just saying like, "Yeah, I'm going for it. I'm going for the throne of Israel." He asks the Lord, which is a good contrast to Saul, who he would ask the Lord, but then do what he wanted. Here, David asks the Lord what to do, and David has the priests on his side. The high priest is with David from several weeks ago when we saw Saul attacking the high priest for giving David bread and a sword. And so he has the surviving priests have come along with him. And so he has the means to inquire, which is the Urim and Thummim, which are like the lots, basically yes, no questions to most of the time. Here we get a "where should I go?" So it's a larger than just yes, no question. But the town that he goes to is Hebron, and Hebron is where Abraham buried Sarah. It is where Caleb, when they go in to conquer the land, it's where Caleb said, "I want Hebron," and he went and took the hill, and it becomes a city that is appointed as a Levitical city and as a city of refuge. And so if you are a city of refuge, if you remember, is a place where if you kill somebody, you can run to a city of refuge while your trial is being sorted out. And so David, who is innocent of killing Saul, he's also going to a place where if he were to be accused of killing Saul, he would be safe in Hebron. And so there's a lot of strategic reasons to go to this city. But while he's there, instead of just trying to build his reign over all of Israel, the men of Judah come and they say, we see you as the leader of our tribe, and they make him the king. And so he's already been anointed to be king over Israel, but this is going to happen in stages. And so God recognized David as the king, and now the people need to start to recognize David as king. And so the first are his own tribemen, and they anoint him there. And then he does this wonderful thing, and it's an honoring of the men of Jabesh Gilead, but it is also a smart political move, because Jabesh Gilead is from a different tribe. And so they are not from Judah. And so he is saying, you did a good thing in burying Saul. You deserve honor for this. I honor you. I respect you. I pray that the Lord would bless you for this. And then he also at the end here says, now Saul is dead, and the people of Judah have anointed me king. And so he's like putting it out there, like, I'm becoming a king. You guys are awesome. Would you like to be a part of my kingdom? Essentially is what he's making those kinds of overtures to to another tribe. And so as these developments are happening, he is going to have these kinds of relationships. Like, he's going to have to build alliances. Whereas with Saul, he didn't have to do the work of building alliances. He just was chosen. And so he was king. So now David actually has to do a little politicking here. And so the Jabesh Gilead, part of the significance for them, though, is they're also on the other side of the Jordan River. And so Judah is down south and by the Dead Sea. The men of Jabesh Gilead, they're on the east side of the river. So they had to come over, they had to go down to the Philistine territory and then go back. But they're also far enough away from the Philistines where they're not being attacked by the Philistines. And so they're a significant part, because now this relationship that David is building is not just on the south side of the kingdom and in close to the Philistines, but he's also kind of building up and around. And he's going to continue doing that, because Saul still has one more son who is alive. And that's where this goes next here in verse 8. Meanwhile, Abner, son of Ner, Abner was Saul's cousin, and he was his head general. The commander of Saul's army had taken Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. The tribe of Judah, however, remained loyal to David. The length of time David was king in Hebron over Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Abner, son of Ner, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat down on one side of the pool, and one group on the other side. And so Abner is building a coalition around Ishbosheth because he's next in line. And so now there's most of Israel is now with Ishbosheth just by default. But he's not going to be king for very long. He's only king for 2 years. And so there's this gap here where it's like, okay, Ishbosheth was king for 2 years. David is a king in Hebron for 7 years. How does this work? It's not consistent. And so the 7 years that David is king in Hebron could also include the period of time after Ishbosheth is defeated here. Spoiler alert, David becomes king. But it could be after that and before he goes up to take Jerusalem, which is where he will establish his capital. So that whole period of time could be 7 years. But in that time as well, there could be some coalition building that Abner is trying to build for Ishbosheth. And so it wasn't like Saul was dead and Ishbosheth was automatically brought in as king. Like, the people probably had to be convinced that Ishbosheth is worth following, because this Saul thing didn't work out too great. And so Abner probably had to do some politicking to build this coalition. And so now the armies of Israel and the armies of Judah are coming together, and they're basically just at this pool staring at each other. Like, what are we going to do? And so Abner said to Joab, so Abner is Saul's he was Saul's general. Joab was David's general. Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us. So they're going to basically do like a battle royale, like just a duel situation. So they stood up. All right, let them do it, Joab said. So they stood up and were counted off. 12 men for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and 12 for David. Then each man grabbed his opponent by the head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down together, so that the place in Gibeon was called Helkath Hazarim. And the little footnote there means field of daggers or field of hostilities. And so like this is a battle royale where all the contestants die at the same time. Like this is what happened in this. So part of me, there's not very many times where we see this kind of activity happening, where there's a battle royale between the people of Israel. Like we see Goliath calling out to a champion to fight for the people to determine that standstill, right? But here, this is really the only time where like the people of Israel, like, let's just kill each other and see who wins. Maybe that will resolve some things. And no, it doesn't, because they all die. And these 24 men then stir up, in verse 17, a battle. The battle that day was very fierce, and Abner and the Israelites were defeated by David's men. The three sons of Zeruiah were there: Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel was as fleet-footed as a wild gazelle. He chased Abner, turning neither to the right nor to the left as he pursued him. Abner looked behind him and asked, "Is that you, Asahel?" "It is," he answered. And these guys are running. And so like, is that you? It is. Like I went for a run this morning. I wasn't able to talk to anybody. Then Abner said to him, "Turn aside to the right or to the left. Take on one of the young men and strip him of his weapons." But Asahel would not stop chasing him. And so Abner is trying to get him to like fight somebody else. Like, I'm just trying to get away, fight one of these young guys. Asahel will not be deterred. Again, Abner warned Asahel, "Stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" But Asahel refused to give up the pursuit. So Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He fell there and died on the spot. And every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. And so he just is like, the blunt end of the spear probably had a metal case on it still. So he just pressed it back, and Asahel's running so fast, the two forces together impale him, and he dies immediately. And part of the way this is written in when every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. Like, this is a known place that people even like years later would probably stop and say, "This is where Asahel died." And so like that's part of the tone that some of the commentators were highlighting. Like, this is potentially a ongoing memorial in this place. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was setting, they came to the hill of Ammah near Giah, on the way to the wasteland of Gibeon. Then the men of Benjamin rallied behind Abner. They formed themselves into a group and took their stand on top of a hill. Abner called out to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize that this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their fellow Israelites?" So Abner is basically saying, like, this is not a good idea what we're doing. Like, we will only destroy each other. But Joab, whose brother was just killed by Abner, says, "As surely as God lives, if you had not spoken, the men would have continued pursuing them until morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the troops came to a halt. They no longer pursued Israel, nor did they fight anymore. All that night, Abner and his men marched through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, continued through the morning hours, and came to Mahanaim. Then Joab stopped pursuing Abner and assembled the whole army. Besides Asahel, 19 of David's men were found missing. But David's men had killed 360 Benjamites who were with Abner. They took Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb at Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night and arrived at Hebron by daybreak. So there is a ceasing of hostilities for the moment. Mahanaim is on the Transjordan. It's on the east side of the Jordan. And so Abner probably took Ishbosheth there to keep him far away from David in Hebron, but also the Philistines. It's a more protected place for this new kingdom to try to get established. And so Abner retreats, and this piece, we see that 20 men total, right? 19 plus Asael died from the tribe of Judah. For Abner's forces, 360 soldiers died. And so this is a significant victory for David's forces. And so if they have David had a standing army of 600 people. And so like the percentages are really in favor of David right now. So his army is strong. Abner's army just got a lot weaker as they have after this battle. So the chapter 3, we get a little break here from the action because we also have to recognize that David is building a house. He's building a family here. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon, the son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second, Keliab, the son of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, the son of David's wife, Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. And so when he came to Hebron, he had 2 wives with him. He is still technically betrothed, probably married to Michal, Saul's daughter. And if we remember Saul, when David fled, Saul took Michal and married her to somebody else. And so David never unmarried Michal. And so that's going to come into play here in a moment. But he also is then picking up more wives. And so Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, this is a foreign wife. This is not an Israelite. The Geshurites were closely affiliated with them, but the people of Geshur were also on the east side of the Jordan. And so David he has on the south side, he's reaching out to the men of Jabesh Gilead. And then Ishbosheth is in Mahanaim. And then above that is the Geshurites in that region up over there. And so he's kind of building an alliance around the area that Ishbosheth is living and where his kingdom is trying to take root. And so this is a political alliance. Now, this is one of the things that kings were not supposed to do this. And nowhere in the Bible does it say kings can't have multiple wives. They can't have many wives is the rule. So what's many? I don't know. But one is plenty for most people. But they are not supposed to marry foreign wives. And so David, even here, he did marry a foreign wife here. And so this is one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, David, not perfect. He's a man after God's own heart, but he is still not perfect. And so he's building this family, this household. He's got some political alliances. And then we also will take note of these sons. So Amnon and Absalom are going to have massive conflict later. Absalom is going to, at one point, try to take David's kingdom from him. Keliab, we never really hear from again. And Adonijah, we will see again. And Shephatiah, we don't really hear much from. But the main two in this situation are going to be Amnon and Absalom. Solomon is not listed here because David's not married to Bathsheba yet at this stage. So he's going to have more kids than this. But this is the family as it stands in Hebron. So we have that little pause on the action to say, look, this is what David's doing as he's building his kingdom in Hebron. Verse 6 of chapter 3, During the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Now Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Ahiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" Abner was very angry because of what Ishbosheth said, so he answered, "Am I a dog's head on Judah's side? This very day I am loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David, yet now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman. May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath, and transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba." Ishbosheth did not dare to say another word to Abner because he was afraid of him. So we see some court intrigue here in the palace of Ishbosheth. And it starts by saying Abner had been strengthening his own position. And so there could be a sense that Ishbosheth sees Abner becoming more and more influential, more and more powerful, and he is threatened by him. And so he makes this accusation that he slept with Rizpah. Now, Rizpah is a concubine, and a concubine is a wife, essentially, that is really only there to have more children. There are no, it's not the same as a wife, as a recognized wife, but there is still a role there in the nation and in the household. The kids are recognized. There's all kinds of things. It's complicated. But for a person to sleep with the king's concubine is politically saying, like, I'm trying to take what belongs to the king. Later on, Absalom is going to sleep with David's concubines. Again, should David have had concubines and many wives? Probably not, but that's later's problem. So I mean, this is a move to try to strengthen your position in the kingdom. And Ishbosheth says, "Why are you doing this with Rizpah?" And Abner doesn't say, "I did this," nor in the text does it say Abner did this. It is an accusation that Ishbosheth is making towards Abner. It sounds like Ishbosheth is following his father's footsteps and making accusations about people when he sees a threat against him. And so Abner's not going to take it. And so he promises Ishbosheth, "I'm going to give this kingdom to David." I mean, that's a pretty bold move to say right to the king. Like, I'm going to take this from you and I'm going to give it to David because I'm not gonna take your accusations, essentially, is what he's saying, which is pretty intense. So then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." And so earlier he says, "I'm going to give the kingdom to David from Dan to Beersheba." So that's north to south, basically. I'm going to give it all to David. And so he reaches out and says, like, "Let me help you do this." And David's response is, "Good," said David. "I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me." Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins." So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, "Go back home." So he went back home. Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, "For some time you have wanted to make David your king. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, 'By my servant David I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all his enemies.'" Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole tribe of Benjamin wanted to do. When Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. Then Abner said to David, "Let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may rule over all that your heart desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. So David gets the message from Abner, is like, "This is great. Yeah, let's do this. But I want my wife. Bring back my wife." And part of the rationale that David would want Michal back is, yes, they were married, but also if he is now the son of the dead king, he also has a claim to the throne of Israel because Michal was the daughter of Saul. And so he's recognizing these political alliances through marriages, they only strengthen David's claim to be the rightful king. And so he demands this. And it's so heartbreaking. Her husband, Paltiel, is following along, crying, like you're taking my wife away. Years they've been married, and you're just taking her from him. Which later on, when David brings the ark into Jerusalem, and Michal is looking at him dancing in the linen ephod, and she looks at him and is ashamed by him. How much of that is also coming back to this moment where she was taken from her husband and given to David. So there's a lot more complication than just David was dancing before the Lord. Yeah, Michal. Right. Yeah. I mean, she is a pawn in all of these political machinations. No, David never divorced her. Yeah. Yeah. So she should be David's wife all along. And so she's just going back and forth, back and forth. So it's a mess. It's all a mess. But Abner comes with, he's fulfilling his promises that I'm going to make this happen. But then he also goes to all the elders of the different tribes and says, you all want David. Why don't we just do this? And they're like, okay. And then he goes to Benjamin, which is the tribe of Saul's family. And he says to the tribe of Benjamin, the elders, you want David to be your king. You don't want Ishbosheth to be king anymore. And they all agree, and so Ishbosheth is on the outs, right? And so Abner comes with his 20 guys and he's like, all right, we got it all worked out. And David throws a big old feast and they're like, yes, this is happening. But there's more. There's more drama because remember, Abner killed Asael, Joab's brother. And so that's where we pick up in verse 22. Just then, as Abner's leaving, David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron because David had sent him away and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king and that the king had sent him away and that he had gone in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you let him go? Now he is gone. Now you know Abner, son of Ner. He came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything you are doing. And so Joab is saying Abner's spying on you is his rationale here. But also, Abner killed Joab's brother. And so there's a personal vendetta here. And so Joab was gone because David, his whole kingdom doesn't have a taxation system in place. There's no way to support the kingdom. And so they're sending out raiding parties into the Philistine territories and raiding and getting plunder. And that's what's funding David's kingdom. So it's not pretty what's happening, but this was part of the way of the world back then. And so they're just trying to have the resources for their kingdom. And so when he comes back, he's like, Abner's a spy. He's just trying to hurt you. How could you just let him go? He's our greatest enemy. And he's very upset that David did this. So then Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern at Sarah, but David did not know it. Now when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into an inner chamber as if to speak with him privately, and there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach and he died. And so he assassinates Abner, the guy who's building a coalition for the kingdom. Joab kills him. And it comes down to because Abner killed Asahel. Later, when David heard about this, he said, I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. May Joab's family never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food. Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed his brother Asahel in the battle of Gibeon. Then David said to Joab and all his people with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner. King David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb. All the people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before the wicked. And all the people wept over him again. Then they all came to David and urged him to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets. All the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people there and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. Then the king said to his men, do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am anointed king, I am weak, and these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. So they kill Joab kills Abner, but David says, like, I had nothing to do with this. You did this without my authorization. And so he calls down curses on Joab's family, and very specific curses. May somebody in your family always have an open wound or leprosy. Like, that's just gross. Or have to use a crutch, or not have enough food. Like, this is going to be something that's going to happen in your family for generation to generation to generation because of your violent streak. But then he also says that you may think you won, but I'm going to have you leading the funeral parade. Joab, you killed him. You're going to lead the mourning for the whole nation and walk before the parade. And like, you are tied to this man's death. And so while he doesn't have Joab executed, like, he's basically like humiliating him. Why Joab stays with David after this, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, there's a part of Joab will continue to be a part of David's army for some time. But yeah, he is basically humbled and humiliated before all of the people. And as the people watch David lead this grief procession and have Joab like in front of it, the people are pleased, and they believe that David, when he says, like, I didn't do this, this was his fault. I didn't want Abner dead. He's a great soldier. He's a great leader. I would never have done this. And so, so this palace intrigue is very thick in the life of David. It starts with Saul, and it just keeps on going all throughout David's ministry. I keep saying ministry. All throughout David's life, there's going to be drama in the palace. But now we've still got this rogue king out there. And so what are we going to do with Ishbosheth? Well, chapter 4 tells us, and we'll stop with chapter 4. When Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage, and all Israel became alarmed. Now Saul's son had two men who were leaders of raiding bands. One was named Baanah, and the other Rechab. They were sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite from the tribe of Benjamin. Beeroth is considered part of Benjamin because the people of Beeroth fled to Gittaim and have resided there as foreigners to this day. So these folks are not actually Israelites, but they are living as resident aliens, essentially, in the tribe of Benjamin. And so they're basically been adopted into the family of Benjamin. So Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. And that detail is going to come up later. But we're just giving a little bit, one more peek into the family tree of Saul, because why it's here, I don't know. But will be a major part for David's life in the future. Verse 5, now Rechab and Baanah, the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, set out for the house of Ishbosheth, and they arrived there in the heat of the day while he was taking his noonday rest. They went into the inner part of the house as if to get some wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and his brother Baanah slipped away. So in arid places like this, it was not uncommon for midday, for like after lunch, for people to take a nap. Like, in Latin America, we have the tradition of the siesta. It's that kind of thing. And so they come in during this window of time where there's probably guards, but they are coming in as people who want to buy wheat. So they're like vendors, basically coming into the king's palace to say, we would like to buy some wheat. And so they're just kind of let in to, like, as caterers into the king's house, basically. These people have access. They're part of they're just going to take wheat to the market. Don't worry about them. So often it's the people who work in the service industry, who like often are just like kind of invisible to so many other people. And so the guard could have just been like, yeah, whatever, and just let him in. And so they come in and they kill Ishbosheth while he is sleeping. So the last son of Saul, who has a claim to the throne, is now dead. So verse 7, they had gone into the house while he was lying on his bed in his bedroom. After they stabbed him and killed him, they cut off his head, taking it with them. They traveled all night by way of the Arabah. So, I mean, it's gross. But they took his head for proof. Like, he's dead. This is how dead he is. Like, and they went down to Arabah. And so they went south and then came back up north to Hebron, to David. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said to the king, here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy, tried to kill you. This day, the Lord has avenged my lord the king against Saul and his offspring. So they think again, we're doing you a favor. You're welcome. David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the son of Rimmon, the Beerothite, as surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble, when someone told me Saul is dead and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and put him to death at Ziklag. That was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house, on his own bed, should I not now demand his blood from your hand and rid the earth of you? So David gave an order to his men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung the bodies by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb at Hebron. So the house of Saul is being wiped out, and David is having nothing to do with it. That's part of what is so important in these verses, in these chapters here, is like, yes, David is going to be king, but he is not the one who is forcing it all to happen. His enemy, Abner, said, I'm going to set you up as king. And so all of the ways that David is going to be anointed over all of Israel, it's all being orchestrated by hands other than his own. And so part of what the writer of 2 Samuel is trying to help us see is, David is he's not an aggressor against his own people. And this is one of the reasons why the people look to him as a king, and they take him on as Abner is building all of these alliances and all of this stuff. And they watch him grieve Abner, even after Ishbosheth is killed. Like, they still are like, yeah, David didn't do any of this. And so, so that's part of the setup for David's ascent to the throne over Israel. And chapter 5, we're going to see it finally be made official that David is going to be king over all of Israel. We're going to see him take Jerusalem. So next week we'll get into the actual start of David's kingdom over all of Israel. So, yeah. So that's where we're at tonight. Any questions on the whirlwind, the palace intrigue, the drama of the life of David? It's a lot.
I never have questions because my mind is just reeling.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that happens here. And so, and these are not the stories that end up on the flannel graph for Sunday school. like with David, like it's David and Goliath and David with sheep. And then he's a king and he's dancing before the Lord, but there's a whole lot of mess that happens along the way. So yeah. Yeah, anyone online have any thoughts, questions? I see we lost Carrie somewhere along the way, so that's a bummer. But no? Well, all right, y'all. Let's go ahead and call it then. And we will be back next week. We'll probably go 5 through 7 next week. So if you want to read ahead, take any notes, any questions that might come up, then we can look at that together. Let me pray for us as we head out into September. Lord, we thank you for the ways that you protect your people and the ways that you lead and provide. And so we ask, Lord, that you would help us to see your hand protecting our lives. And while we see David as far from perfect, Lord, you still protected him in amazing ways. And so, Lord, I ask that you would help us to trust you with our very lives as well. So we thank you, Lord, for your word, the challenging and the encouraging parts, all of it. We love you. Amen. Amen. All right. Have a good night, everybody.